So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kelly Kenzel. I lead the outreach and engagement team here at Clayborne Education, and it's a pleasure to be hosting this informational session in partnership with our friends at Premium Prep. So in thinking of planning for this webinar in this moment, we know how stressful the season can be for parents of high school students. You're balancing classes and extracurriculars, testing and college applications. It's a really critical time. And so our goal today is in this webinar is to make that process feel a little less daunting by answering some of your questions directly and giving you some practical research-based insights. So that being said, a quick housekeeping note before we begin. So if any questions come up during the session, just drop them in our Q&A chat bot here on Zoom or chat box, and we'll do our best to answer all of them towards the end. Okay, so starting out today on our panel, we have Lee Elberson. Lee is the CEO of Clayborne Education and has over 20 years of experience in the tutoring fields. With a strong foundation in academic research, he's deeply committed to supporting students of all learning styles and abilities. He's especially passionate about increasing participation in STEM programs and working closely with schools to expand access to high-quality academic support. Under his leadership, Clayborne Education delivers services to several hundred students annually through strategic school partnerships. And then also we have Alyse Levine with us, founder of Premium Prep and a leading college counseling expert. Before founding Premium Prep, she worked at top independent schools in the Northeast and in the admissions office at Washington University. Alyse has also more recently served on the selection committee for the Robertson Scholarship Program, a highly selective full tuition scholarship collaboration between Duke University and the University of North Carolina, Robertson Scholars Program. Alyse truly knows all the ins and outs of college admissions. She brings a thoughtful, data-driven approach to every student's college journey, providing guidance and support that helps them feel confident, seen, and prepared every step of the way. So Lee, I'll turn it over to you. If you could start out by telling us a little bit about Clayborne and how families can navigate the current standardized testing landscape, especially for juniors who are in a really critical season right now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kelly. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. So just to give you an idea of what Claiborne Education does, we cover anything in the test preparation realm. And so that means anything from taking a diagnostic SAT or ACT or even CLT if you're in that sphere, and coming up with a plan for you that fits your students' individual needs. And so we know that there is no one size fits all. Some students are going to start sophomore year, some are going to start in junior year, and that really depends on what your plan is. And in any given testing environment, we want to make sure that we find a fit for your students, and a good fit is just like a good fit in class. And so if your student says, I really enjoy this class, usually what they mean is they really enjoy working with that teacher. And so when we think about a good fit, we try to pair the student with a personality that will really bring out the best. And if not bring out a love of test prep, at least we'll bring out a love of the college admissions process, and we'll really help them get to the finish line. And so we generally work with students over the course of 4 months to 12 months, sometimes longer, sort of depending on what the journey is. And if your student is a junior starting now, we're happy to get started and lay out what that plan looks like for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lee.
Yeah.
Um, so now I'll pass things over to Alyse, who's going to walk us through sort of what she's seeing in the college admission space from her perspective at Premium Prep, kind of how students and parents can plan ahead, and what colleges are really looking for today. So I'm going to share my screen here. We have a little
You can
presentation.
wait a minute,
Okay,
Kelly.
yeah,
I'm
sure.
going to go over some basics first and then I'll prompt you. We have some slides, but thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you so much, Lee and Kelly, for having me and having Premium Prep joining you today. We love collaborating with you guys. So I'm the CEO of Premium Prep. We are a team of about 20 counselors and 20 writing specialists. We are really one of the premier college counseling companies in the country. Our approach is unique and somewhat different. We only hire counselors who have made this their professional career, who have, what that means is that they have worked in an elite high school, a private school, and in occasional cases, a public school that has a designated college counseling office, um, who have worked in schools doing college counseling for a minimum of 10 years. So we are all career professionals. In my opinion, that is the best place to really get the training to know the vast variety of colleges and what they are looking for. Admissions background is also very valuable, and many of our counselors have that as well, but that in and of itself is not enough. Many people come to this work straight from admissions and they tend to know the one school they worked at. Really, by working in a high school, you get to learn the field, the industry, and the variety of colleges and how differently they are evaluating, looking at students. The other unique advantage to our company is that we collaborate. So you really get the advantage of all of our expertise. If I'm working with a family that wants to apply to California schools, and I am not as expert in the UC system, we bring in one of our UC experts. We have athletic experts. So you really are getting the benefit of the full team, but of course, working with your designated assigned best fit counselor. Just like Lee said, we really care about that fit, making sure each student is working with the counselor that is going to be best suited for their particular needs and goals. So diving into some basics, as Kelly said, about the admissions process. The first thing is to be authentic. It is so important to come off that page as your true self. If you are doing a lot of things just to check the boxes, chances are that will come across either in the recommendations or in some other part of your application. The more you can genuinely do the things you love and do them deeply, the more that will come across in your application. The more you put your own words and thoughts and voice into those essays, the better. We make sure that students maintain that voice. We do not over edit essays. We are there to help students' voices come across, to guide them on the topic, on what will help set them apart, but not to in any way influence that it is their voice coming across. That applies with the other tools out there too. ChatGPT can be a great tool for research, for brainstorming. It is not the best way to write a compelling, truly personal essay. It will lack that personal voice and sound rather generic. So that authenticity really needs to come through in the entire application. What are colleges looking for? They are looking for students who are pursuing the things that they care about deeply. They'd rather see students pursue fewer things deeply than scratch the surface of a wide variety of things. And you can certainly begin to narrow and deepen as you progress through high school. Many parents in the room, we think about the college process from our time. It was all about being well rounded. That's the past. Now it's more about the angular or the pointy student. So it's not that you have to have a singular interest, but you don't have to be well-rounded. Not every student has to play an instrument, do a sport. That's no longer necessary. Do what you love. The other piece that is really important that is applicable to all students is the fact that colleges are not just looking at what you do, but the why, how. They are looking at not just how smart you are, not just how well you've done in school, not what a fantastic leader you are, but what kind of a person are you? What is your strength of character? They care about that. They have measures and ratings within their admission systems to not only look at what a good student you are, how good your test scores are, but what kind of a person you are. And where do you think those qualities come across? Essays, recommendations. So it is very important to make sure, again, that that authenticity and the why behind you do what you do is coming across. Another area that we are working very closely with students is helping guide them on their academic course selections from one year to the next. This is such a personal decision. When you visit colleges, they really emphasize rigor. Well, what is rigorous for one student is too much for another student and too little for somebody else. So it is a very individualized decision, balancing rigor and performance. If you tip the scale too much in one direction or the other, you are either not challenging yourself enough or over challenging yourself and your grades are suffering. You also want to think about those course selections as it relates to your potential major or area of interest. If you are very interested, as Lee mentioned earlier, in a STEM field, guess what? Your math and science curriculum and testing is particularly important. So that's just one example. The last thing in terms of the basics before we get to a few important slides is that it is important to recognize that applying to college, whether it's test prep, essay work, application work, the whole process, treat it as if it's another class. It is time consuming, demanding, there are deadlines, and you need to be organized and methodical. If you try and cram and do everything at the last minute, something will go wrong. It is really important to dedicate time weekly when you are applying to college to this process. Okay, so getting a little bit more into the strategy and some of the data. We're going to pull up the slides now, Kelly. So if you don't mind pulling up the first one, that would be great. Great. There are several different rounds when you apply to college that are offered. The most common ones you will see are early decision, early action, and regular decision. Early decision means you apply early and you are making a commitment to go if you are admitted. You also hear early. If you apply early action, you are not committed to going, but you do hear early. And then regular decision is a later deadline and you hear later in the process. So the only one of these rounds that has a commitment, a binding commitment, is early decision. Because of that early decision binding commitment, you will see that there is quite a difference in the admit rates in the early decision and the regular decision round. It's important to understand this and think strategically about this. Colleges want to lock in these students early because it helps increase their yield rate and lower their admit rate. So you see here examples of schools that are pretty dramatic in terms of their early decision versus their regular decision admit rate. Now, Tulane's is a bit confusing because they also have early action. So there isn't quite as big a gap between the early and the regular, and that number is not on there. But for schools that do not have early action, a place like Emory, it's a great example to show you how dramatic the difference is between early decision and regular decision. The temptation with this is to apply to the biggest reach on your list. Good idea to reach in early doesn't mean you're necessarily a candidate at a school that's too big a reach. So it's about finding that sweet spot. That's very important and something you want to talk to your counselor about. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Major matters. We talked about major a little bit earlier as it relates to your course selections. So it's very important that you understand which colleges read by major and which don't, because this varies quite a bit from institution to institution. In addition, if schools offer you the opportunity to put a second choice, that's a great way to broaden your options if you're open to a second choice school or major within the university. That preparation piece is what I talked about a bit earlier in terms of understanding and making sure that you have the right preparation for the major. And this is where the early counseling and making smart decisions in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade is so critical. If you want to study business, It is very important to have advanced math, ideally calculus by senior year, and to do well in math. Students often don't understand how the competition can vary from major to major. So this is another important layer and strategic part of the process. Okay, next slide. This gives you some examples of how the admit rates vary from school within university by program or major. So let's look at the first one, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where you see the overall admit rate of 42%. Let's look at business, since I just used that example, 23%, significantly more competitive. Nursing is another area that's highly selective. Purdue, that's an example that I put there. You will see on the flip side, often for schools of education, the admit rate is higher than the general admit rate. That's an area where they wish they saw more applicants. So you will see that at a school like Wisconsin, perhaps, or Texas. So very important to understand this nuance. Next slide. Getting to our shared area, Clayborne and premium prep, I wanted to be sure to define the different terms of testing. Since COVID, the vast majority of schools, as you know, have remained test optional. It's over 2,000 schools, or about 80% of schools. This means you have the choice whether or not you want to send scores. There is a growing number of schools returning to requiring scores. It's about 100 schools. Very recently, University of Pennsylvania, Ohio State, University of Miami. And then there is a small number of schools that are test-free. These are primarily the California public schools. It's about 80. Within test optional, there's quite a bit of nuance. It's important to understand how those schools treat test optional, what the admit rate, what the enrolled students look like in terms of the percentage that have indeed submitted scores. So you see at a place like Duke, a very high percentage of the admitted students have submitted scores. At Vanderbilt, it's pretty even. And at Pepperdine, it's quite low. So they are not as focused on testing. Now, whether or not this is deliberate or not is a topic of discussion, but just looking at the data and understanding the patterns of how these schools incorporate and use testing is very, very important. Next slide. Another key factor for students who are interested in public universities is to understand the in versus the out-of-state admit rate. So looking at a place like Tennessee, you see the admit rate out of state is about half that of in-state. Most colleges are admitting at a much higher rate in-state. They're there to serve their state. Place like UVA, that would also, of course, be the case. You will see that the variability is different from institution to institution. San Diego is a good example. Their admit rate is actually higher out of state right now. So again, important to understand this deeper layer, because when you are just looking at the overall admit rate, which is what's published in most national websites, it does not break it down in this way. Okay, next slide. I always like to do a then versus now. So this is about a 10-year spread, just so, again, everyone can see and understand that the competition really has gotten significantly tougher in the more recent years. We are at a population drop this year, so we're hoping that there's some shifts here and we see that the admit rates don't continue to go down, down, down. But this is a trend that we have watched over the last 10 to 20 years. So keep in mind that the selectivity at colleges has gotten to be just a lot more intense, certainly than 10 years ago, and certainly when we all applied. Okay, The last is not a slide, so we can go off slides, Kelly. There was not really anything statistical to show here, but just to mention a concept called demonstrated interest. Colleges often track interest, and that is another strategic piece to understand. It's a bit of a game, but we call it showing the love. It's really important that if you are applying to schools that are tracking who is interested, that you know the ways to show interest in those schools. There are active ways to show interest, like visiting the college in person or virtually. And then there are more passive ways, like a great start is just to get on their mailing list and start opening their mail, which many colleges are tracking. Who is opening the mail? Who's clicking on the links? So understanding the concept of demonstrated interest and its public information, who does and doesn't track, is very, very important as you begin to explore and navigate the colleges on your list. That is the end of some of my strategic tips. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview and those insights. So now we're actually going to move into the question portion of the webinar. Thanks to all those that submitted their questions beforehand. But again, if you have any other questions that come up, you can leave them in the chat box. So I'm going to be alternating the questions for both Lee and Alyse. First of all, we'll start out with Lee. So how early should students begin preparing for standardized tests? And what does an ideal testing timeline look like for sophomores and juniors?
This is an excellent question. And as I said before, I just want to let all the parents know there is not a one size fits all, even for testing timelines, but there are some smart patterns that we've noticed. And I think the key is to plan early and test strategically. So what do I mean by that? So what we see in most of our very successful students is that before the beginning of their junior year, they know which tests they are going to be targeting. And so are they going for the SAT or the ACT, or in some cases, the CLT? There's a number of ways to determine that. A student could determine that on their own by taking full-length diagnostics and then using a concordance table. That can be a bit cumbersome. Always, you could come to a place like Clayborne Education. We do free diagnostic and consultation process. We have a free preference test, and we will let you know which test your student has a preference towards based on their percentile ranking. So once a student is armed with that knowledge, knowing the tests that they are going to target, what we see is that great results happen when students start about 16 weeks before their target test. Really excellent results happen when a student starts a year in advance. And even though that sounds like a long time, junior year flies by so fast, both for students and parents. And so when looking at those strategic test dates, we generally see that a winter test date, usually the December test, is a good way to sort of dip your toe into the waters of test prep. And then after that, generally a spring test, either the March for the SAT or the April for the ACT, is a good secondary test. We usually see that students are not interested in the May or the June test. There's just a lot going on with AP seasons and the end of school year for students to see significant gains. So they will generally skip over that and then opt for a summer test, which would be either July for the ACT or August for the SAT. And at the end of those three tests, a student really has seen their optimal gains. And so that can change if a student is as a student athlete and they are committed somewhere. Sometimes that pushes the timetables up. What I can see for sure is the students who experience the most stress and the least amount of gains is what we call in the industry Hail Mary seniors, meaning that it's beginning of senior year and you think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do about test prep? It's a bit late at that point to see significant gains. So my advice is to always start early, and that means you utilize free resources, contact Clayborne Education. We will lay out a plan for you regardless of whether or not you decide to work with us. So that's my answer.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Lee. Alyse, the next question's for you. I know you kind of started to get into this in your introduction, but I think it's probably worth diving deeper on because I know it's a pressing question for parents. But beyond grades and scores, what are colleges really looking for today?
Yeah, I'd say it's the two I's, initiative and impact. They're looking for students who take self-initiative, have that independent ability to see a need and to step up, and students who have an impact. That impact could be in their school community, their church community, their summer camp community. It could be that they have an impact on the environment and making our earth a better place, an impact in helping animals who have no home or who need medical assistance. It does not have to be that you are helping people, is my point. Not everyone is interested in that. Helping people is great too, but showing that you care about something bigger than yourself, that you are committed to something. So that community service piece or work ethic, having a job, a real job, kind of pulling up the shirt sleeves. Again, that character piece is so important. And I think the essays are really an opportunity to showcase this. The personal essay is not a resume. It's not a place to kind of jam in all your greatest accomplishments. This is not like applying to med school where you want to talk about the sequence of what you've done and how it's led to your decision to want to be a doctor. It's a narrative, it's a personal story to give them that window into who you are. So we spend a lot of time beginning that brainstorming process, doing free writing, exploring a few different topics, and then homing in on one and having that done by midsummer. So we can then pivot to supplemental essays, which are really more focused on what that school is looking for. So very much where our expertise are also coming in understanding the fit, what is unique about Vanderbilt, what would be valuable for them to hear and for you to showcase, why you are a good fit for that school, why your values are in sync with what that College of William and Mary, whatever it might be. So those questions tend to be a bit briefer and a bit more specific. What do you want to study? Why do you want to come here? Are probably the most common questions. I think one other area to just briefly mention that gets a little bit overlooked are the recommendations. Students, parents, you have an opportunity to make these letters strong. A lot of schools are large and counselors have large caseloads, and frankly, teachers have large classrooms. So give them the information they need to help trigger their memory about what you contributed in that class, what you loved about the class, the material, what challenged you. Same with the counselors. We work with a lot of students who barely know their school counselors just because the caseload, the student to counselor ratio is so big. Do the brag sheet. Parents, you can really help in this area. Brag away. Help them know your child better. This obviously can vary from school to school. Some private schools have a much smaller caseload. Teachers are teaching in smaller classes. But even so, often they're writing 50, 60 letters. Help them write the best recommendation letters they can possibly write so that you stand out in that area.
Okay, great. And then another big question for you, Lee. With so many schools still remaining test optional, even though the tides are changing, as we were talking about earlier. How should families decide whether to take and submit either SAT or ACT or CLT scores? And how much weight do those scores still carry?
Well, that's a very nuanced question, and I might tag team this with Alyse, and her slides were extremely helpful. But what I generally hear amongst college admissions professionals is if a student has the ability to take a standardized test, they should take it, because the test optional movement isn't really about limiting things for students. It's about providing options. And so a student can go through test prep, get to their scores, and then when they match those up with the schools of interest, they can determine where do they fit in that 25th to 75th percentile, and then they can make an individualized basis for the schools on whether or not they're going to submit scores. And there is no answer I can give now based on what to do with each of those scores. But I think I can speak to how important is test prep. And as taken as an aggregate across many schools, what we hear is that standardized tests in applying with the test pool is about 15% of what's called the college admissions index. The index is an aggregate of a lot of the different data points that a student submits. It's GPA and class rank, it's extracurriculars, letters of recommendation, a number of other things. And so one of the reasons why we always encourage test prep, not just because we are a test prep company, is because it's one of the things that you can move the needle on quickly. Your GPA and class rank, by the time it's junior year, you're not going to be able to move the needle as quickly there. Test prep, we can move the needle in just a few months. And so, again, starting early and figuring out in those practice test environments how quickly your student is advancing. And if a student stagnates, we can always say, you know what, we're going to switch our strategy, and we think it's better for you to spend your time on other parts of your application as opposed to spending more time on test prep. So, Alyse, I'd love to turn it over to you and see what you feel about it.
Yeah, I would say I agree with all of that. Looking at that mid 50% as it compares to your child's score is the best way to evaluate to send or not to send. Um, it does not have to be an all in or all out. We definitely have students who have who are submitting to some schools but not others based on how high certain schools test score range is. If their child score is competitive for some schools but perhaps not for others, so it doesn't have to be a one size fits all approach. And I agree, most of our students do attempt to take these tests, do test prep, and most of them are successful. There are students for whom the testing just doesn't work out, or it's just they don't reach their goal and they don't send their scores. So we don't want to convey that that's not a possibility. It is. You still can go to college if you end up not happy with your test scores or not pursuing testing. And we definitely have students in that camp. That does happen. But giving it a try, because it can be beneficial, is valuable. And frankly, there are schools that require it. So you are kind of eliminating certain options if you don't try the testing, since some schools will require it. And you might not know when you start where you want to apply. Really quick, Kelly, why don't we share those last two slides that speak a little bit to the data and how to go a little bit deeper in making these decisions.
Sorry, one moment. Just putting that up.
And while Kelly's pulling that up, this information is directly from a resource called the Common Data Set. It's the second to, to last slide. So I think it's 7. Yeah, there you go. Yep, there you go. So I just used Wake Forest as a random example. This will tell you a lot of additional deeper data to make this decision. So we always look at this school by school when helping students to make this decision. So it tells you of the students who enrolled, the percentage who submitted scores. So you see here, it's about 50% because you just add the 22 and the 25. So Wake is one of those schools that's kind of evenly split in terms of who enrolls, who did and did not submit. That's not that surprising. Wake is a school that was test optional before COVID. So their attitude about testing tends to be a little bit more relaxed. Then in the second chart, it tells you we get into that mid 50% that Lee was speaking about, looking at that 25th percentile and 75th percentile score. So you can see the composite score as well as each section of the SAT and of the ACT. I know science is on there, which is a bit confusing because that's now optional, but at this time it was required. So it was included there. So you can really do a deeper look at where your scores fall, both the composite and the section scores, in making a decision. Next slide, please.
Oops.
Okay. So this just gives you even more information about the percentage of students who enrolled that were in these ranges, 700 to 800, 30 to 36. And again, by composite and by each section. So again, all you need to do is look up common data set, the name of the school that you're interested in, and you will find this information to have that deeper dive as you are evaluating to send or not to send.
Great, thanks. And Alyse, I know you mentioned how important it is for students to be doing volunteer programs, extracurricular activities in high school, but I think parents are wondering, especially during those more demanding seasons of your junior year, how do you, which should you prioritize? And especially with heavy course loads and maybe even sports, how can students make time for those passion projects or something unique that helps them stand out?
Yeah. So the word passion project really came out of the pandemic, where a lot of the more traditional activities were on hold. It was really hard to play basketball on your school team. It was really hard to be in the theater production. And so we started getting creative. Students started getting creative. Students were gardening in their yards and just discovering other interests, which was really one of the silver linings of the pandemic. The term passion project has stuck around, and I think it's a double-edged sword. It puts a lot of pressure on students that everybody has to have this like unique project that they have dreamt up and created, that they've invented something, that they've cured something. Most students don't have that, and some have it, and it really doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel like it's theirs. So I think when you have a passion project, when there's actually something you're really excited about, and you like stick with it and you make something happen. We had a student who helped work on a project creating. She was a ballet dancer. Tights for a wider variety of skin tones. And that was something she was really passionate about because she could never find tights that actually matched her skin. That was really neat and something she was very passionate about. Some students are really passionate. I had a student really passionate about the classics. He came from a more inner city background and felt like it just wasn't something that young people in his town and community in Durham, North Carolina were exposed to. He went back to his elementary school and started teaching like a little bit about the classics through the literature of Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. And I just thought that was such a neat project. Things like the classics can be less common for kids in inner cities to have exposure to. You often see those kinds of subjects really focused on in a lot of the private schools. And so that was something he cared about deeply. So I think when you have an idea and it lends itself to its own initiative or project, run with it. Absolutely. If your passion or experience is more in the realm of student government, well, maybe you're creating a new initiative in your school. That's awesome. Like I had a kid who helped with some apps, so it helped with the long lunch lines in their cafeteria. You're making that impact. You don't all have to have an invention, cure, disease. So I think passion projects are like I said, kind of a mixed blessing.
And then Lee, what is one common mistake that you see families make in starting the test prep journey or in the test prep journey? I'm guessing it has something to do maybe a little bit with strategic timing. And what's your advice for avoiding that, any of those mistakes?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I've mentioned several times, start early. There's really probably not such a thing as too early. If you approach an organization like Premium Prep or Clayborne, if it's too early, we'll get you started on a trickle. So I think that's the best way to avoid anxiety. The surefire way to have anxiety is to wait very late because you just limit your options. So I think, yeah, starting early. I will say I did see a question come in, and I would love to hear Alyse and myself answer it because it's one that actually I heard yesterday, and so I'll try to frame it in a more general way. Is that okay, Kelly? If I
Yeah, do you want me to pose the question?
I have it.
Okay. Yeah,
Uh,
go for
Alyse, imagine that we have a student who's neurodivergent, has had a poor testing experience, is disengaged from school, and so it isn't involved in school clubs, and so the parent wants to know how do we speak to that kind of student, or maybe just in general, how does the parent approach a student like that if the
Mhm.
idea is to mention college aspirations?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do work with students across the whole academic range and students that are neurodivergent, have IDDs. And so this is not unfamiliar ground for us. I think so many of these conversations can focus on the most selective colleges, what you should do to kind of maximize. We're just not all cut out for that. And that is completely okay. I think for a student who is unengaged in school, not going to do testing, isn't involved in clubs, doesn't love school, it's about finding what they are excited about. Really having those conversations and then helping them to delve into that. Whatever it is it anime? Is it skateboarding? Um, is it what is it that that student is excited about? And please don't tell me video games. I know that's a thing, and that's a hard one, and I do struggle with that. But even that, there are so many ways to think about and dive into how that is an interest. And there are industry opportunities with video games. There's a ton that one can do with that. So that was a bit of a joke, but I know sometimes when you're working with students who are like, I don't have any interest, you get into the video game conversation. But everyone has interests and things that they are excited about. And it's about tapping into that and finding ways for them to explore that. I think what is so different today than when people like myself at my generation applied to college is it really the what doesn't matter. It's not that important that you check a box of having certain types of interests anymore. In fact, if your interests are more unusual, that might help you stand out even more. So whatever that thing is, let's find ways for you to get more involved in that interest. And that will make you a happier person, a more successful student, and a more successful college applicant. If we are not hitting any of the right notes for this particular question, parent who has posed it, please feel free to write follow-up questions so we can answer it better for you.
Yeah, thanks, Alyse. I just to tack on to that, I think that's perfectly aligned with what we do in our study skills program. Get many students who are disengaged, not interested in school, and so to broaden that out, we do perform the concept of goal-directed persistence. What is the end goal? What does a student want to do, and
Mhm.
eventually, and then how do you tie college or community college or a gap year? How do all of these pieces fit to them being
Yeah.
happy? And so tying that back to what am I doing today that's going to end up making me happy one day? And like you said, I like video games means, well, you might be creating artwork and shading for a video game one day. And so let's just tug along.
Yeah. And sometimes this student is more receptive to a neutral party. And so having one of us, doesn't have to be our companies, get involved, especially for teens, right? They're trying to assert their independence. That's very normal. That's very healthy. And so parents' ideas get shot down really quickly, even if they're good ideas, just because it's coming from their parent. I mean, I raised two children. I get that. And right, we've all been children. We remember when our parents drove us crazy.
Yep.
And the last question I had for Alyse was, how does a student create a balanced list of colleges? And what exactly does balanced mean? What does it look like? And also, a second part of this question is, when should parents start college visits with their teen? And how should they rate those colleges? Or things to keep in mind when they're visiting colleges to rate them?
Yeah, absolutely. So a student should start with a preliminary college list of about 20 to 25 schools. Some students we start a little bit bigger, some it's more narrow, depending on how clear they are and what they do or don't want to study. Lots of students have no idea what they want to study. That's okay. Um, and then as we begin to research the schools, visit both virtually and in person, we begin to adjust the list, amend, eliminate as those clear criteria come into focus. And then the final list should be about 10 schools. You want to have 3 to 4 schools in each of the following categories: reach, target, and likely. You want to use national data, admit rate, test scores to assess how much that school is a reach, target, or likely for your child. And you also want to look at whatever local data your school provides, often through college software programs. Like our company uses Maya Learning, sometimes it's Naviance, sometimes it's Score, where you can see the historical data of applicants from your particular high school. So you're getting that local snapshot as well as that national snapshot, and making sure that you have those levels correct and adjusting them as your child progresses through high school and you have more data points, more updated grades, GPA, rigor, test scores, all of those pieces, as well as a sense of the activities, the resume, how the student is going to come across in those aspects. So it's looking at both the data and those softer factors as you build out the list. So for college visits, first of all, schedule in-person visits to about 2.5 months in advance, because calendars fill up quickly. These info sessions and tours fill quickly, especially at the popular times of year like spring break. So make sure you're watching those visit calendars to see when the dates you want open up. I always tell my students and parents, like, put reminders to keep checking. Um, if you are interested in particular areas within the university, go deeper. If you're going to Cornell and you're really interested in labor relations, go on the ILR tour and info session. If you're unsure, do the general. If you want deeper information and they don't offer it, contact the department or the school directly. Very often they will accommodate. Um, Take notes. We have lots of ways that we help students to answer questions after each visit, think about, reflect on those visits. But honestly, I don't care if you journal in your phone, in your iPad, as soon as you get in the car, on the plane, write everything down. That will help you remember each school, because it all starts to blur as you see more and more schools and more time lapses. Also, you will really find that information valuable when you go to write those why us essays, the why us for Oberlin, the why us for Amherst, having those specifics to go back to of what you saw, experienced, heard when you visited those schools, sat in the student union, chatted with a random student. Only you had that experience. Whereas when you're just pulling information from the website, it tends to be a little less personal. So journaling, note taking, very, very important after each visit.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. You really tackled those questions. Um, before we wrap up tonight, I do want to highlight how you can connect with our teams both at Clayborne and Premium Prep for more personalized support. Lee, I'm going to share our website, share my screen to show our website. Do you just want to reiterate briefly how parents can get in touch with us and what they can expect?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Sharing my screen.
So you can, if you navigate to our website, claiborne.com, or you just Google Clayborne Education, we'll pop up. And there's a few different ways to contact us. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll see a phone number. You're welcome to call. Grace will answer the phone. She'll be happy to answer your questions. And the very next step after talking to Grace will be to put you in a consultation with one of the owners at Clayborne. So we do all of our programs start with a consultation. You will get a chance to speak with one of the subject matter experts. And this is really a parent's chance to find out more about the process. The second thing you can do, let's say you don't want to talk on the phone, just click on the Get Started page and contact us. Again, the consultation is free. The best time to get started is now, and we can lay out a plan for you. And if you're just interested in some of the resources that we have, you can look on our blog page. There's a number of different blogs about, what do I do with my PSAT scores? What is the CLT? How test prep is like a marathon. So that's a number of the different resources we have on our page.
Amazing. Thank you. And I'm going to pose the same thing to you, Alyse. How can parents get in touch with you guys at Premium Prep? Do you offer a free consult, anything like that?
Yes. So we offer a free consult, book now, get in touch, blog, FAQ, very similar to what Lee explained. We meet with each family for about 40 minutes to get to know you. We then recommend counselors. We then give you the opportunity with your child to meet with that counselor, identify if it's a good fit. We do guarantee the fit if for whatever reason the counselor you choose ends up not being the right fit, we regroup. But we do put a lot of effort, all of that is free, into getting to know you, your family, your child, and making sure that we are matching you with that best fit counselor. I'd say most often, you can also call us, by the way, 1-800-560-8760. Also, my personal email is alevine@premiumprep.com. Feel free to email me if you have specific questions or want to chat. The most common reason families end up changing counselors, we had a student who was really focused on D3 schools in New England, wanted to play volleyball, and then realized, nope, I want to stay in Virginia and go to a big school closer to home. And the counselor she was working with was not as expert in that area and came to us and said, I think this student is actually better off making the change. And the student was kind of torn because she was connected to the counselor, but we ultimately did make the change because we wanted to make sure she was with the person who really had the expertise that she needed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuned in for the webinar today. Just so you know, we will be sending out a recording of this after to your emails. So feel free to share it, with any other parents or friends who you think might benefit from this discussion. And also check us out on social media. Feel free to send us a message anytime on Instagram. Any question you have, just let us know. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.